governments assist you, the private sector, to create a magical future for the continent. I'd like to now welcome the Managing Director of the IFC, Magda Diop, who will open the session for us. Magda, welcome.
The President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, dear Order, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Mr. Bassirou Diomaye Faye, President of the Republic of Senegal, Mr. Robert Begré-Mombe, Prime Minister of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Jesus Dion, Prime Minister of the Republic of Cameroon, Mr. Amadou Woriba, Prime Minister of the Republic of Guinea, Mr. Kassim Majaliwa, Prime Minister of Tanzania, Dr. Olavo Avelino Garcia Correa, Vice President of the Republic of Cabo Verde. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Africa CEO Forum that is shaping the future of this continent. Every year, this event gathers head of states, head of companies, investors, public, financial and technical partners. We are here, more than 2,000 participants. I can understand that we are more than 3,000 participants coming from all sides of Africa. This is showing an Africa that is acting. We were in Kigali last year, and the vision was Africa is. I thank warmly our host, His Excellency Mr. Alassane Ouattara, champion of the private sector that is welcoming for so many years. Thank you, Excellency and dear Elder. I would like to thank also all the head of states that allow us so that this event can be an important event of the private sector in Africa. I would also like to thank my partner and friend, Amir Yarmel, President of Group Jeune Afrique Media, that we share the willingness to put forward innovating actors, resilience, and bringing solutions for Africa. We are living in a world that is quietly evolving with so much uncertainty, tension, geopolitical, all type of inflation, and we all the capital and floods, change, climate change, and health crisis as well. Now, due with all this, it is important that we should look at our ambitions, and is in this type of moments that we should look a little bit further, think bigger, act quickly, is to seize the opportunity, to refuse the resilition. Mobilizing our talents, resources, creativity, so Africa can be at the same level of the potential. So this is evidence, transform our natural resources, our critical mineral in a digital economy, and we carbonize it to be able to our continent cannot just stand on what we have as resources. We have to create local values, resources, competitive, and order of employment. We are being offered a framework and landscape where we can invest. We should not waste time. Every day without economic integration, it is a waste. It's a waste of growth and an opportunity that we miss. Transforming our raw materials, we are increasing our presence in the world economy and our development in the long term. Our second wealth is the human capital. Our youth, with talents, creative, entrepreneur, present our biggest asset. But sometimes, most of the time, they are underestimated, underused. Creating opportunities of employment and sustainable should be at the core of all our policies, and this go through an adaptive creating for the need of the demand of the market. Yes, in order to have those two transformation, we need the private sector. We will need, in order to have those two transformation, to value our resources and free our creative energy of the youth, and go through private sector. So the person that invests, the person that innovates, the person that gives jobs, in order to successfully play this role, it's important to have an environment that will be attractive, a value chain that is integrated, a public dialogue that is consistent. Africa proved that it is able to do that. Now, for the private sector to play its role, it's important to go further, because the main challenge of our era is the employment sector. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 10 coming years, the world will have to create 1.2 billion jobs. And with a constant trajectory, we can only have 421 million. And the gap is really big, but we can overcome it. But the condition is to act quickly and together. Employment cannot be cannot be a consequence of development, but it has to be an objective, the best way to sustainably have a cohesion. Those are the conditions that we all need for everyone to be where we are supposed to be. This is our mission, and that is the reason why today we decided to increase our commitment on the continent. We are going with this ambition, with a transformation in deep with our institution. That's what we call SFI 2030, is to increase the financing in the private sector, mobilize regional and international capital, and also create every year 100,000 employment, in particular for the youth and for the women. But in order to be successful, we need solid foundation, modern infrastructure, public policies, consistent and climate investment that is stable, capacity to mobilize national and international capital. And this is what we translated in our strategy SAI 2030. We define 5 clear priorities: create vehicles of collective investment to attract institutional investors, foreign and nationals. Secondly, develop joint venture with local investors. Thirdly, reinforce our investment in equity to share the risk. African companies are over debt and they don't have enough equity, and it's our role as SFI to help African companies to reinforce the equity. Fourth, in financing of the SMEs, help them to grow, because employment is at the level of the SMEs. Increase our participation directly. This patient capital that is really precious is not with the private sector in Africa, and this is something that we should really take upon ourselves. Our institutions should evolve. It is clear that today discussions, transformation of institutional development is within other debates. At the level of the World Bank, we had discussions on those questions during our last meetings. And what we came out of that is that today we have to be in World Bank group. We cannot present ourselves in our countries through different windows that we have. We should bring integrated approach to our countries. The president, in our different conversation, you mentioned that point. Today, we made some huge progress in this area, having an integrated approach. The World Bank mentioned to have a guarantee. All put our expertise and efforts. In many countries, we were a single window. With the President Jarrah Faye in Senegal, we inaugurated the regional office. We are decentralizing our vice president. The vice president for Africa, Mr. Ethiopia Stefara, will be based in Nairobi, close to you, and answer to all your needs and demands. Ladies and gentlemen, this challenge of 2030 is ongoing. From 2025, we were able to mobilize 60 billion in the world, 15 billion for Africa, and this will be on the 4 years. We know that is not quite enough, and we know that there is a lot of demands. We're continuing looking further. I would like to thank all the head of states that are helping today to carry this initiative of M300 that we allow to connect 300 million Africans to the electrical network, and this is really important for us. We have a collaboration with the African Bank of Development and sector private and that will allow us to create some sustainable growth. Also, we have similar initiatives in the sector of agriculture, health, to reinforce in a long way health security of the continent. And as we promised in Kigali, we support the creation of a network of agencies of promotion and investment that is more dynamic, efficient, and coordinated. And we will also put in place some conclusion with the recent summit on the artificial intelligence that will allow Africa to be more integrated in the world economy. We are also launching the network of the agents of investment here in Abidjan that will allow to generate efforts of our country to attract more national private efforts. In conclusion, the terms of this forum is clear: a new pact with the government and the private sector. A pact that will allow to have a dialogue at the continental level between the private sector and the public sector. A pact that will allow to create a strong value chain that will help in our economy and will increase the wealth and have some more jobs for the population. This pact of engagement, of transparency and results, and in order for that to happen, the political willingness that you are showing here, Mr. the Head of State, to improve the environment of business, not having our ambition as the dream, but we have to put our words into actions for the private sector as well. Africa should work for the youth, value the talents. We have the resources, we have the ideas, we have the partners. You can rely on I at the World Bank and our partners to help you in this task. We are close to you on the field as well. We will continue to work to help your vision. Africa is building itself with you and under your leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Makta. Please help me welcome our host, His Excellency, the President of Côte d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara.
Dear friends, I would like to start by saying Akwaba to my brothers and friends, the head of state, Jamafai, Cyril Ramaphosa, Mohamed, Soko Gwezani, and Bassirou. Jamafai, and of course, Paul Kagame. I would like to tell you that we are really happy to welcome you here in Abidjan for the 5th time. I will not, you know, people, if people are looking at you, they will not listen to me anymore. Friends, It's a pleasure to welcome you once again in Abidjan. It's a pleasure to that it's a privilege for us in Abidjan and tell you that it's a privilege for us to have this opportunity. You know, Cote
To
d'Ivoire
say
is a
that
land of hospitality,
it's Africa
and we are
that is
proud
all
to
gathered
say
here
that
because on the 30
uh,
million
it's,
of
it's
people,
Africa
we have
that
10
is all
million
gathered here
that come
because
from
on the
Brazil 30
countries,
million of
and I would like to salute the head of states of the different countries, Cameroon, Guinea, Tanzania, that made us the honor to be in our midst, and also the representative of Angola, Morocco, and Nigeria. After the edition of 2024 that was organized in Kigali, and the chairman of my friend Paul Kagame, Cote d'Ivoire is particularly happy to host for the 5th time this prestigious platform dedicated to dialogue between the private sector and the public sector. I can say that my young brother Magda Jog said all. So I would like to thank him and express my gratitude to the group Jeune Afrique. I know that the Prime Minister Robert Mangue dedicated a lot of time for the organization of this forum, and I would like to give a round of applause. Of course, the participants of this important meeting that are the public maker, the international and local media that came from all parts of the continent and beyond our borders. You are here to exchange on the main challenges. The world is undergoing some turbulences and some major mutation of the geopolitical aspect, economical and financial, environmental, and also on the international commerce with the policy of the tariff. Of course, this brings a lot of risk, and for each country and for every one of us, and a lot of volatility in the mid and the long term that is impacting our economical system, and of course the situation and the well-being of our population. We saw recently in the months an exacerbation of in the business world that created some problems in the supply aspect, and also the perspective to go back to the normal aspect is coming slowly, but we have a lot of challenges. Africa is going through a lot of issues, access to financing that has been minimized. A lot of countries have insecurity with the permanent threats of terrorist group, while others are in the political instability. And we have a lot of issue going on in the different. Despite this world context of uncertainty, as I was saying, and my brother President Amaposa, Cote d'Ivoire has a lot of resilience and a dynamic of strong growth that is around 6% from 2024, that is projected to 6.5% in 2025. The inflation is being managed and should establish around 3% in 2025, which is way below the regional average, and I can even say at the continental level. Our resilience is reinforced by the diversification of our economy that is carried by the dynamics of the agricultural sector. As you know, Cote d'Ivoire is the first producer of cocoa with 40% of the world production, and the first producer of cashew nuts as well. We just discovered some important of oil gas, and also the extractive economy is increasing. But all that can only be evolved with a dynamic private sector. And this is the choice that we made, that in all those sectors, private sector is in the front four and the major part as well of the investments in this sector. Just to give you an example, the employment in the private sector in Cote d'Ivoire is around 350,000. In the public sector, and we are around 60,000. So we have an macroeconomic landscape that is relying on a lot of investment in the private sector. Cote d'Ivoire will continue to monitor the solidity of its macroeconomic framework to favor the development of the private sector in a sustainable rhythm. Of course, in order to increase the African economy in the creation of the added value at the world level, we have to reinforce the exchanges in Africa while pursuing the efforts of transformation of our products and our raw materials. And I can say that on these points, I salute the presence of my brother, the President Issoufou. We have to make more progress. The ZLECAf has started very well, but unfortunately the results are still low, even if Cote d'Ivoire is one of the countries that is working a lot with the countries in the sub-region and countries on the continent. We have this common willingness to affirm with clarity to create a new balance, to be in a reciprocal commitment between African countries and having a sharing vision of a development and reinforce trust. You know, all that can be done if we really are able to improve the structural transformation of our economy. And that should really rely on concrete priorities of the human capital that is competitive, guarantee our food sovereignty, energetic, industrial, our value chain, accelerate the development of renewable energies, and of course, as our young brother Mata mentioned, master the artificial intelligence and digital technology. I think that Africa has a lot of potential in this area with the youth that is really close and understand better artificial intelligence. We should do our best to encourage our youth to invest more in this sector. So I would like that this huge summit in Abidjan would be a moment of real commitment, gathering all the public decision makers in the public and private sector to have some strong solution, ambitious that are adapted to our reality, to emerge the next generation of African champions. In Cote d'Ivoire, we are working a lot to emerge some national champions. So it's on this word of hope that I declare open the 12th edition of Africa CEO Forum, and I thank you.
President Ouattara, please stay on stage. I'd like to welcome the other heads of state for a photograph. If you would kindly join us on stage. And good to be here. Amir, you know, I was at the very first Africa CEO Forum all those years back, and I've seen conversations change, evolve, and I've seen it put into action. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Eleni. Thank you. You've been here for a long time now. You've seen the growth of the forum. Please allow me to speak in French since we are in Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais d'abord commencer.
I would like to thank all the participants that are here. As Magda mentioned, it's more than 2,800 participants to this edition, and this is an extremely strong signal of dynamism and mobilization of the private sector. I would like to thank President Ouattara, his vice president, and all the Ivorian government, the prime minister, for all the efforts, the hospitality, and the support that they give us in conferences of making Abidjan the francophone capital of this forum. I would also like to thank and salute all the head of states, the president of South Africa, president of Mauritania, Rwanda, Senegal, prime minister of Cameroon, Guinea, Tanzania, all the ministers and authorities that made us the pleasure to be in our midst. It does send a strong signal to the willingness to develop this topic that is the New Deal between the private and public sector.
It's a foundation. The world has shifted. What needs to happen in your mind? What are you looking at?
Je crois que
I think we already said that we are in a world of uncertainty. Every day we wake up with a great Netflix series, Donald Trump in the White House. There's always new decision that is in contradiction to one came the day before. And even the different companies, I don't know if that was the case for Orange. We have some provision with the 2025 perspective. There is a brutal change in the exchanges in the world that is transactional. Another uncertainty is that the traditional partners of the continent, the United States, Europe generally are massively with a lot of debt. And we saw that also France had a lot of issue for the budget, and United States were having some discussion on the regular shutdown, and this is going to have a strong financial impact and the different modality of development. We heard that the United States say that they will reduce their contribution to the concessional fund of the African Bank of Development. This is a clear impact. We also saw the foreign flow of investment that is really increasing. So we are now seeing that government have seen a double in debt at 70%, and there is not a lot of margin to really find solution to overcome the challenges of the continent. So our conviction here at the CEO Forum is that the states should rely a lot on the private sector. Now, when we talk about relying on the private sector, we are not talking about taxes. This is not the message that we want to deliver. What we are talking about is to help the investors that are here. We have 3,000 participants, a lot of CEOs. We are calling them and calling their attention to invest more and help to solve all the issues that we are working on, the food security, digital transformation. But in order for that to be able to be implemented is essentially working on three things for us. The first thing is to have more efficient states, more ambitious, and an evolution of the ZLECAf. Be more efficient means that we should come back and put on the table a subject that we do not talk about, which is governance. We are in a world that globally we are being quite restrained, where we have a lot of stakeholders, but governance is also part of a key topic. So the sectorial, public policy, and we have a conversation with different states. For example, we already discussed with Thailand, Cambodia. Now, the third subject is ZLECAf. The President Ouattara mentioned in his speech, ZLECAf started in 2019 with 15% of community exchange. 6 years later, we have figures of 17%. I think we all have time we want to see our children, our grandkids. So it's important to continue in that rhythm. And I think this is the main challenge in discussion this year.
And we need to see extensive change. Crystal, I want you to jump in here. When we talk about, and Amir really set it up beautifully, we'll touch on governance and accountability in a bit, but I want to ask you this. As a multinational with an extensive footprint across the African continent, what do you need to see? What needs to happen at a government level for you to create more value addition, more jobs, to expand further? What is prohibiting you from going bigger?
Well, I think, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to speak English, but maybe I should switch to French. But I think for the panel, I'll stay with English. But it's very important for any company, whether it's a small or a big, a local or a multinational. And I think for Orange, actually, we're not a multinational, we're a multi-local company. It's very important to have predictability. And I think if you want to attract investment, predictability is probably the key driver. When it comes, of course, to Orange, we are investing massively. And there's really, we're talking about more than 1 billion every year in our infrastructure on the continent. There's really three things that can help continue to unleash the potential of Africa. Number one, and it's been said, it's really talents. And we are investing in developing talents in every country where we operate, because this is for us the key to being able to grow, and talents, of course, within the company, but more importantly, in the countries where we operate, through our Orange Digital Centers, through free training. And digital is a key enabler, because it's opening barriers and borders for talent. So talents is number one. Second, infrastructure. Because we like it or not, but access to energy, access to digital infrastructure is key for the continent to grow. We are doing our part, and it's not just local infrastructure, which you could think of when you think of telecom. It's also the link, the submarine cables, the terrestrial backbones. And we've seen that when there's a catastrophe, and I think Ivory Coast knows that, if there's an earthquake, undersea earthquake, countries can be completely in the dark for several days. And so infrastructure is part of this resilience. And the third, of course, for us is we want to grow on the continent we want Africa to be a tech hub. We need Africa to grow, and that's what we are driving across countries. So we have these different hubs across the continent. We are investing locally on our platforms. When I say locally, it means on the continent, because that's going to help attract others. And I think that's the notion of ecosystem.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got a question, and I want the audience to weigh in on this. Amir mentioned governance and accountability. And I would like to get a sense from you, and please put your hands up if you agree. Do you believe that governance and accountability is holding the continent back? If you agree, put up your hand. Okay, that's pretty significant. Interesting. Eda, to you, sir. And where is it working and where isn't it? Because you have experience, you've just signed a big deal. Tell me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Elena. First of all, I'm honored to be here. When we come to talk about the issue of governance and accountability, it's a very wide topic. I mean, we can discuss in a length way, but just to shorten it, first of all, I would like to acknowledge that the African and countries where I operate, they have done a good job, quite well, in improving the governance and the accountability. I've been around for 18 years in the business world. I can say the transformation I've seen so far is good. Apart from that...
but is it enough? Do you believe that we're in the right momentum?
Well, you see, we have to start with primary and then we go to secondary. Enough? No, because the world is also moving. So as much as the African continent is trying to move, but the world is moving farther. But they're trying. For example, okay, let me give an example, setting up a company. In some African countries, you can do that in one day. But in others where I've experienced, it takes up to 6 months. So it's not really helping the entrepreneur.
Ethiopius, I want you to give us your take at the IFC and what you've seen.
So I wanted to touch upon the point that Amir started with about the role of the private sector and what it is that needs to be done to facilitate them playing a bigger role in closing development gaps. You know, in the very clever chat, there was a statement about the fact that official development assistance is on the downturn, right? And it was never enough in any event to close all the development gaps around the world. And the only way you can actually do that is by mobilizing private capital. In the years I've been working within the World Bank Group, what I've noted is that there's no shortage of private capital, and there's no shortage of investors interested in investing in countries. Frequently, what's at stake, or what the issue is really finding projects that are bankable, where you've got the calibration of the allocation of benefits and risks between the private sector and the public sector right? So I think we need to increasingly start talking to governments about what it is they want to finance with public money, what it is they want to finance with private money, and then help those projects that they want to finance with private money get to bankability by getting this calibration, this allocation of benefits and risks right. And as Makhtar indicated earlier, I think it'll be incumbent on us to work with our colleagues at the bank to be sure that governments feel that that calibration takes into account the public interest, right? I think that has been one of the gating issues, is that sense of, am I getting the right deal here, right?
Yeah,
but I think that will be key.
Can I interject just for a second there? And I think you make such a pertinent point there, because it is about the deal. It is about what government wants to finance, what the role of the private sector would be. What has your experience been in terms of the appetite of where public money will go? For the purposes of people in this room, what is your take?
So I think because of the shortage of ODA, of official development assistance, I think we need to focus on placing that public money in initiatives and in reforms that actually will enable and mobilize that private capital. It's scarce, so it needs to be carefully applied to open up the floodgates for more private capital to come in. And my experience is that we haven't always done that, but there's certainly the inclination and the intent going forward to do that, because we realize that's the only way we're going to unleash this additional capital necessary for development.
And Amir, you know, specifically focused on governance and accountability as one of the key issues that need to be dealt with. You've been working with the private sector on the African continent for a long time. To what extent have you seen this remaining one of the biggest grievances, and what do you think the solution is?
So I think from 2000 to 2025, there were some strong years of growth in the continent that was facilitated by the initiative of PPT that removed the debt of a lot of African countries. So a lot of people made a lot of money, countries were developed, and we stopped talking about governance. So now, realizing that 2 or 3 years ago that there is again a movement of political instability, we saw in Sahel, we saw that there is a distrust between the stakeholders and the government. So now the quality of governance, I think that fundamentally for countries to be developed, we have to look at the quality of governance, public policy, development of national champions. So those are the three priority topics that a government should follow in order to be developed. So in the topic of governance, there is a lot of efforts to be made, efforts of the efficiency of the state. I think Christine mentioned the subject of digitalization is a major subject in order to have a more effective government, incorporate companies to have the visa. So at the administrative level, those are the efforts that we have to make.
Of money to complete your acquisition. The largest cross-border deal in East Africa was $250 million. Yeah. So a lot of divestment is occurring on the continent of multinationals that are opting to spin off or sell assets in Africa. And this might be a really important opportunity for African private sector to step in. And your experience in terms of raising the capital of this opportunity coming up and what the private sector should be doing when opportunities like this arise.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Raising the capital, I believe, was or is one of the biggest challenges we're facing in the continent, especially for local entrepreneurs. So for us, yes, the experience was very tough in raising the capital. We had to go beyond borders. We arranged locally, and we also at the same time had to have a backup plan with the international funder. But thank God that the local one pulled through. So yeah, on to the second point. It is true, there are such opportunities when international organizations are exiting the continent. I believe it is the right thing and the right time for local entrepreneurs to step it up and capture those opportunities. But the things that they should be done is basically, number one, a very good assessment on what's being sold or what's being offered on the table. Do a proper due diligence, and if the company or the sector that is being offered matches your ambition, then go for it.
Christelle, industrializing the continent is the vision. It is the priority. In fact, we've become very dogmatic about trying to find a way to industrialize. And technology is going to be the backbone of the industrialization process. We want to harmonize border crossings. We're looking at the AFCFTA. Give me a sense of how you're working with governments right now to make that dream a reality as it's being implemented.
Well, I think in every country, and it's been said, it's of course working with the government, but it's also working with the national champions and with entrepreneurs and creating a new, growing also the private sector from the continent. And that's something that, of course, we do in every country where we operate, but of course, more importantly, in the largest of the countries where sometimes we invest in platforms that are shared platforms across countries. We, of course, work because of the payment. The mobile payment is, of course, a key enabler of traceability and of course, economic empowerment. And this is true in every country, in the 18 countries where we operate on the continent. And then in every country, of course, depending on the maturity of the discussion on modernizing and using digital as a way to modernize the administration, to modernize every sector. And by the way, this is a discussion we have in Europe as well. I don't think we should be shy on the continent. And I come from a country where there's still a lot to do, and we also struggle on public money. So this is something that we have to work hand in hand. It's probably easier to do in companies, and many companies have gone through the digital journey. It's more difficult because it starts by, of course, migrating your data and having also the local, because there's also something critical for every government. Where will your data sit? So we are investing in cloud infrastructure on the continent, in the countries, because of course there's a lot of security, sovereignty discussion that we have with governments, because it's something that is, of course, a decision of a country authority to decide where they want to locate their data if they transform and they move to digital. And it's true that in some areas, there's limited choice from a technology standpoint. And so this discussion around which technology do we use, where will your data sit, which cloud infrastructure, can you trust the infrastructure in case something happens? These are discussions we have in every country.
Yeah, and you've got to digitalize governments as well. And that's very key.
Absolutely. And this is where, I mean, digital provides transparency, traceability, and of course, but this is something we do in companies.
Can I ask you, how far away are we from a fully digitalized continent on a government perspective?
We are far, but we are far in every, I mean, you go to Asia, Asia is probably the most advanced part of the world, but you go to Europe or you go to the US, there's a lot to be done. So again, I don't think we should be, I mean, Africa, because of the, I mean, the mobile revolution is something that everyone has a mobile in its hand. Now, of course, we need to continue to, I mean, provide accessibility. There are still parts of countries that are not accessible through digital, and this is something we're working on, of course, with governments. But it's true that if you, I mean, you take any administration, whether it's health, finance, any ministry, any administration, there's a lot to be done.
Okay, I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to try and shoot as many questions as possible. Ethiopius, I was listening to President Donald Trump talking about the BRICS, and he says the BRICS are dead. And if any country tries to use anything other than the US dollar, then he will slap 100% tariffs on these countries. There's a big conversation happening on the African continent right now. Do we settle in local currency? Do we find ways, and through the PAP system with the African Continental Free Trade Area and African Bank, they're piloting a program. What is your sense of the best currency to trade in on the African continent? And what does the private sector want, do you think?
Well, I'm going to answer that question taking into account our perspective as to what we need to do on the continent. And I'm cognizant of the fact that in trying to develop the private sector across the continent, we're really working with local firms, many of whom don't generate revenues in hard currency. So I think for us, it's increasingly important to find ways to finance them using local currency. Yeah. And that is my objective, is to try on a country-by-country basis to be positioned to actually provide financing in local currency as opposed to hard currency. Because if they're not generating hard currency, in essence, that hard currency loan is imposing a burden on them, which makes it difficult for them to succeed, and our objective is to have them succeed. The other form of local currency is equity. I think we have taken the decision that we need to do more in terms of providing equity investments and taking equity stakes in companies. I'm fond of saying, and I think this is absolutely true, that with debt you run companies and with equity you build companies. And what we need to be doing is building companies on the continent. Now, it's riskier. It's a riskier type of financing. But identifying potential champions that you can, through equity, grow into regional champions and then global champions, I think is the objective. I mean, many people don't realize that, for example, at the IFC, back in the 70s, we financed LG. The big electronic, it started out as an equity investment, right? HDFC, which is the fourth largest financial institution in the world, started out as an equity investment by the IFC. That's the kind of thing we need to do on the African continent, and what we're intent on doing over the course of the next months and years.
Okay, Ed, just a quick word on currencies. What do you want to be trading in? Dollar? Local currency?
At the moment, definitely local currency. I'm sure the whole continent is facing the dollar nightmare. But local currency is the best way to do.
Okay, quick question. Local currency, hands up. Dollar? Well, if you don't want to trade in local currency, I'm going to assume. We've got about a minute left. Amir, I want you to wrap this up for us. How, because the theme is this new deal and the winning deal. I want you to describe what the winning deal would look like.
I think there are two important things. All entrepreneurs that are here share these objectives. We have our best in class and the rhythm. And this is something that we should absolutely put in our discussion with the government. Do we have a best-in-class governance? Do we have public policies that are best in class? And are we working in the rhythm in which we have to work? And also, we are doing a lot of rankings, our companies, and it is important for Africa to stop comparing itself in its environment. It has to be out of the comfort zone. There is a world that is emerging with the African Union, European Union. There's more than 40 countries that are making more than 700 billion. Africa has to be in this competition. The competition should be Colombia, Thailand, Indonesia. We should not be comparing and competing among each other. We have to look differently our ambition.
Ambition, vision, using the right benchmarks to attain that strength as a continent, because we've said this, we've got the leverage, we've got it all. Ethiopia's Edda, Christelle, Amir, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Thank you. Right, we're on to our second session, a very exciting one. Our presidential panel is about to begin. It is my honor to welcome not only a friend, but a colleague, as well as an exceptional journalist, Larry Madowo from CNN. I've never done that before. Welcome.
Awesome, thank you. Excellence, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone.
I was like, what's happening?
I know, it's my fault. There's a lot of changes happening today. I have to welcome Acha Leke to stage. He's the chairman of the African region for McKinsey. Acha, will you forgive me? We're very good friends as well.
I think Acha owes, Lenny owes Acha dinner.
There we go. Acha, I'll take you out.
Thank you, Eleni. Thanks, Larry. Good morning, everybody. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We thought as we kick off this morning, we'll just share a few elements of context from a fact-based perspective, which should influence the discussions we're going to have over the next 2 days. I was given, the slides up? I was given, there we go. I was given 6 minutes, so I just chose 6 key elements of context, which I think we should be aware of. The first is where we are today as a continent. As we know, if you look at, the interesting thing is there's some indicators that are showing an economic resurgence. We look at what happened in the rising decade between 2000 and 2010. We had 16 countries growing at 6% or more during that period, every year, 16 countries. And we know President Ouattara spoke about that today. We know 6% or more is critical. That's the minimum it's going to take to really make a difference in our economies and to lift our people out of poverty. Between 2010 and 2020, that number went down to 9. The good news is in the last 4 years, we have now 15 countries that are growing at that clip. Now it's led, of course, by Ethiopia and Rwanda that have grown consistently throughout that entire period at over 6%. We also have, as President Ouattara said, Côte d'Ivoire that has been growing over the last 15 years. Now, these countries represent only about 20% of our GDP and 30% of our population, right? That can't think of the population. So we need a lot more of these countries, especially our large economic engines, to hum again. But this is a positive signal. The second point has been spoken about quite a bit today already, ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. Africa was has been the largest recipient of ODA in the world. About 40% every year comes to us. It went down a bit with the Ukraine crisis, but about 40% comes to us. We know that's under pressure. The question is, what are we going to do about that? How does that create an opportunity for us to actually own our own development ourselves, right? And as a new deal with the private sector, how can the private sector lean in a lot more to fill in some of the gaps left by these development partners? Another topic we'll be discussing over the next 2 days. The third point, we've talked a lot about tariffs. The good news, honestly, we're not as affected. If you look at SSA, the dark dot there, we're not as affected, and that's because we actually do not ship much to the US. Now, some countries are affected. We know some countries, some value chains, especially with AGOA and some of the value chains are affected. But overall, we're not now. From a defensive position, that's interesting. The question is, can we go on offense? As people are pulling out of Asia in particular, how can we start to feel those value chains? How do we be much more proactive in making that happen? We can't just sit back and wait for it. How do we take advantage of this opportunity? Something we should discuss over the next 2 days. The fourth point is the fact that no region is an island. The darker the blue, the more you export, the lighter, the more you import. And you can see we live in a very interdependent world. This picture is going to change, but we will still live in a very independent world in the next 10, 15 years. How do we as a continent take advantage of it? What are the risks associated with this, by the way, for us, right, in some of value chains? But how do we take advantage of it? And how do we provide some of the goods and services that the world needs coming out of the continent is something, again, we should be discussing over the next 2 days. The fifth point, this is one I've been talking a lot about, is about talent. Talent in Africa is, I always say it could be our next oil, right? We have the talent, you can see here. The world needs the talent. We have it in a very aging world. And more importantly, we have the lowest cost of talent in the world, right? So this is where it is. Now, what are we going to do to take advantage of it? It's not just going to happen randomly. We need to make sure that we prepare our talent. We need to make sure we identify the opportunities and we help capture the opportunities. I really think if we do it right, this is the biggest opportunity for the continent going forward. Final point, as we're here to talk about the private sector, how's the private sector doing? Private sector in Africa has been incredibly resilient, incredibly resilient. If you look at Jeune Afrique's top 500 companies in the last ranking, yes, revenues dropped about 2.7% on a dollar basis, but that's as currencies devalued by 27%. So net on the local currency basis, actually, you know, our companies did well. What we didn't do as well is really capturing these efficiencies. So margins also shrunk, and most of my best clients, what they do is revenues drop. They also figure out how do I manage my cost base to protect my margins. So very efficient private sector, but how do we drive a very resilient private sector, but how do we drive a lot more efficiency in our businesses? So those are the 6 points. I just wanted to end with a few questions I think we'll be debating over the next 2 days. One is, again, how do we sustain the progress we've seen from a growth perspective? And really, especially, how do we get our large economic engines humming again? Secondly is, what does the private sector need to do to lean in and mitigate some of the risks that have been associated with the change of the global order? There's a big role for the private sector to play. How do we do that? Third is efficiencies. Like I said, you know, we need to drive a lot more efficiencies in the private sector, but we also, as we know, need to drive a lot more efficiencies in the public sector. How are we going to work together to make that happen? Fourth is talent, right? It's not just going to happen. We have the talent, but we're just not going to capture that opportunity. How are we much more proactive between the public sector, the private sector, our development partners in making sure that we make the most out of it? And finally, as you know, we've been tracking the number of billion-dollar companies, about $350 billion companies in Africa. But honestly, that's not enough. How do we get more bigger companies and larger bigger companies? Looking forward to the discussion over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Start the presidential panel now. We're going to talk about a powerful Africa towards economic, political, and commercial integration. And we have some things to talk about in this African family. So please help me welcome. I'm very excited to welcome His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa. Please welcome to the stage as well His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda. One seat pending because we will also be joined by one more leader in just a moment. But thank you, gentlemen, so much for taking some time to talk to us here. You have the private sector from the continent and beyond, the people that drive the economies across the continent. And President Ramaphosa, you have the privilege of chairing the G20 this year. And there are many people here, private sector, governments, who are hoping that because you're in this pole position, you can advocate for the extension of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, quota-free, tariff-free access to the US market, in a time when the opposite is happening. And in your case, have you even been able to convince President Trump to show up?
Well, there's still a long time from now to November, and a number of discussions will be ensuing. And so the G20 process consists of 130 meetings the whole year, and we participate with a number of countries, and the US also participates, and leading to that summit where we will, as South Africa, hand over to the United States. One would hope that it will all happen seamlessly and in an ordinary and well-managed manner. So we will see how this whole process will end up. But we are excited as South Africa, and very privileged to be heading the G20 for the very first time on the African continent, and we're particularly pleased that our own continent as a whole, through the AU, is now a member and will be participating fully as we get the world to discuss our priorities and our theme, which is solidarity, equality as well. And as we do all that, we expect that our key priorities will become top of mind in the discussions that are currently taking place leading up to the Leaders' Summit in November.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we are joined on the stage as well by His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of Mauritania. I'll come back to that in just a second, President Ramaphosa. But President Kagame, when we spoke in February, at the beginning, shortly after President Trump took over power, you said you supported the cuts to aid, that we as Africans have to be self-dependent. We can't rely on other people to fund our development. A lot more has happened since then that in some ways threaten our economic advantage as Africans. Do you still support largely what President Trump is doing in resetting our relationship with America and forcing us as Africans to step up?
Well, thank you, Larry. I think we have to put everything in a context. Whatever President Trump has decided, or whatever anybody else will decide in the near future, there is a history to how we've been going about things for decades as Africa. So it isn't like we should just wake up one morning and because of what somebody has done that affects us, we should have been building up the momentum in terms of what we need to do to make Africa self-dependent and resilient, and also in how Africa works with other continents and other countries. So that is the context. So in this case, it is as well that President Trump decided to do what he did, if that was only to add to many other reminders or things that should wake us up to, as Africa, be able to do what we ought to do. And there are many opportunities. We always talk about potential of our continent, but when do we realize really what this potential is all about in reality? I think that has always been the question. And that comes back to us as a continent, as a people of this continent, to take the bull by its horns and deal with the problem. So we can't keep depending on what others are saying or doing about us. We need to be working with each other and other countries on the global stage that offer what we need, and we as well offer what they need. I think this is the context.
You have been an advocate, President Kagame, of reforming the African Union. Is it, as currently set up, the vehicle for us, our aspirations as Africans, when, for instance, you've been critical of its role in mediating in the conflict that you have with your neighbor in the DRC, in the Rwanda process, in the Nairobi process, and the best results appear to have come from one meeting you had with President Tshisekedi in Qatar. So the African Union failed there and Qatar succeeded.
Well, I think there are several efforts going on at the same time. That's the problem. And even that one we are talking about, whether it is Qatar or the US, or we can't say we have succeeded. Everyone is trying. And again, it comes back to us, really. If you look at what we've been doing on our continent, much progress has been made. I think we can't say nothing has been done, generally. Whether it was to do with the reforms, and I think Africans have come together. They have defined things and speak with one voice increasingly. There is significant progress. And, but most of these developments that have been happening in the last decade, as I said, remind us that there are things we need to do that we haven't done. So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. Because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries. We find we depend so much on the external partners and forget ourselves to put in place what we really have to do and can do. So that is progress. And then, so in terms of peace and security, and again, you look at the whole continent, you find there are many trouble spots in different areas. All kinds of efforts going on, back and forth, succeeding in some places, not succeeding in others, and continued efforts going on. Again, these are some of the areas, because of the past and how we have handled our own affairs, that we are all of a sudden reminded that we can't do all things by ourselves, and revert to these partners. In other words, in any case, it doesn't, even if we're able to do things ourselves, we still have to bring in partners who have what to offer. But we have, as Africa, to be able to define which direction you want to take, and not entirely depend on what these people are contributing.
All right. President Ramaphosa, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, on the peace process, particularly in the conflict that's been happening on our continent, and particularly in the Eastern DRC, I'd like to compliment, rather than contradict, what President Kagame is saying. The processes that have been happening on the continent, either the Nairobi process, or the Rwanda process, or the AU process, have been very, very essential in building a foundation of peacemaking and also confidence building, up to and including agreements that have been reached for a ceasefire between the belligerents up to and including the withdrawal of, say, the SADC forces as they are withdrawing now. I mean, people may think that President Kagame and I are in conflict, and some of you may have thought that there's going to be fireworks as we're sitting close to each other.
It is wonderful to see you agreeing and not contradicting each other. You're all thinking it.
So all these efforts have been building a very strong and firm foundation. And of course, because our countries on the continent are not islands, we don't live alone in this God-given world or planet. We have to interface and interact with others. So whatever contribution others can make who are extra African is important. But in the end, we must also remember the principle that we have adopted as Africa, that African problems or African solutions for African problems. In the end, and President Kagame knows this, whatever discussions are happening, in the end has to be endorsed, signed off, and owned and appropriated by us as Africans, because this is our continent. We are in charge of the future of this continent, and we must build peace ourselves because we live on this continent, and therefore we have a deep responsibility to ensure that peace does indeed prevail. And what they are doing with Qatar, US, or whoever, is part of the peace-building process, but it is inherently African. And we must thank and applaud those who are assisting because they are our partners, but we are the owners of the whole process ourselves as Africans.
President Ramaphosa used to address family meetings during COVID where he'd have tough conversations with South Africans. And I think, was there a family meeting between you and President Kagame where you had this tough conversation?
Well, we have family meetings unbeknown to many people who see certain things happening just 2 seconds, 3 seconds. We have family meetings between the two of us, ongoing discussions, and on a speed dial with each other to discuss all manner of things. So forget the psychedelic things that happen in the air. Focus on what we do together to build the peace process on our continent.
Thank you, Your Excellency. President Ghazouani of Mauritania, you have in recent months made some big announcements directly involving the private sector. You signed a new public-private partnership law in 2024 in November. You had a framework with the OPEC Fund in January of this year, and the DREAM project with the World Bank, which you launched in March. Does this shift reflect a change in your philosophy toward the private sector? And how will you be leveraging these projects to energize Mauritanian businesses?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, it is true that in Mauritania, we are in a vision that gives a capital importance of the private sector in the creation of jobs, creation of added value, and make the private sector a locomotive of economic development. Indeed, you know that the pressure has increased on the government for the accomplishment of their mission, and we are actually trying to mobilize public resources. And this reality is obliging the private sector to be a key sector that is essential for financing and also the provision of services in favor of development. We are convinced that the private sector cannot fully play this role if the states is not committed and putting necessary reforms to build an environment that will be more attractive, that will guarantee the legal security of the investments, whether at the national level, international level, more modernization of infrastructure, promotion of human resources. So it's only that the project that you mentioned when you in your question, that is actually confirming our willingness to favor emergence of a dynamic private sector that will bring more growth and also employment as well. Now, today, the private sector has the possibility to intervene as a self-producer of its needs in energy, and also sell the surplus to public companies of electricity through key tools that favor the development of the SME, like the new code of electricity, the new law that we just put together, impact the Pact of Energy, reform of the public market, the new code of investment, and etc. So our national pact as well of energy that was presented in Dar es Salaam in January during the launching of the M300 program. This is for the private sector to be more involved, and we are around $28.5 billion, and on the 2.5 billion that we projected. So this is a important commitment to allow the production of 100 and 200 megawatt of electricity, IPP and PPP. So now regarding the new agreement, the partnership that we signed with the fund that you mentioned for the amount of $120 million is a support that is directed in the IPP and also the DREAM project as well of $181 million that we signed with the World Bank, that we allow also through the battery of storage to reinforce the capacity of Somalek, and also benefiting a technology and also an expertise developed on the private sector. So globally, to conclude, our economic and social developments can be increased through a dynamic private sector with more ambition and committed with the public action. Thank you very much.
And Honorable Vice President, a few days ago, the African CEO Forum surveyed some of the private business leaders who are in this room and who are participating, and they asked them whether or not they felt that the African Continental Free Trade Area, or le CAF en français, was having an impact on their activities. Only 17% of the business leaders they surveyed said yes. Are you surprised by these results? Only 17% think the AFCFTA has an impact on their business. And how do you interpret that? That level of, I guess, pessimism.
Thank you very much. I would first like to express my gratitude to the President Ouattara that allowed me to be with his colleagues here in this panel. You mentioned that in the private sector, we are realizing that we are realizing that things are not quite as we wish that they will be. I think that what was mentioned earlier is so important. The most important is governance, because governance, as we mentioned, is what allows to create the necessary framework for the evolution of the activities, private activities. And I will not go back on what was already said, but what we all wish is that the expression will be done. So it means that the people that need this governance that will be directed in a certain way should say it precisely, because the needs are multiple and are multiform, and is through the collaboration of everyone in all sectors of activities that need coverage, and we should work accordingly to our needs. So I think that if the governance is good, and that the companies and the private sector is able to find ideas, the performances will be good, and this is what we are seeking for. So here is what we should seek. Exactly, the good governance that goes through what the private sector needs as a sign, as value, as need, and that can allow to go further in the result that we are looking for. This is what I can say globally. And this exercise that we are having, for example, is simply something important to help the private sector to provide and also exchange and reach the objectives that we set. And this only can be done if, one, the willingness is there, secondly, the conditions are met, and three, that the performance will allow to reach and meet our objectives. So in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, we put in place a national plan of development on 5 years, and that was also renewed. So this plan take into consideration all the concerns that the private sector have in order to be performant. And the results are, of course, the level of what we were looking for, a rate of growth around 7% per year, which we were able to reach, and the performances that go beyond what we even expected. So here is what we should be looking for. Thank you very much.
Are you surprised that only 17% of these business leaders feel that the AFCFTA has impacting their business?
Yes, well, it is.
Because you're a big advocate of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes, which I'm about to speak about. It's quite concerning if that is the perception. You know, as I walked in with President Ouattara, President Kagame, and others, as I entered this room, I could smell money. And I welcome this opportunity to sit here and look at people who have money or control money. And as I look at all of you, and I say, wow, these are people who control a lot of money on the continent.
Right.
And I want them to smell the coffee and go beyond their 17% skepticism, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a fundamentally transformative mechanism that was adopted by the leaders of the continent. And we should recognize and applaud the fact that the political leaders under the aegis of the AU saw wisdom, and led by President Issoufou, and President Kagame was leading the reform process. They saw wisdom in scaling the fortunes of Africa up and moving us just beyond just talking about politics and the unity of the continent, and wanting to put in place the real building blocks of what will support that unity and the progress on our continent. And that was about the economic growth of the continent through engendering trade, and that's why the African Continental Free Trade Area was adopted. So it is an engine of growth. And through it, we'd like the private sector to embrace it, to participate in it, because what it does, it gives the African continent an opportunity to integrate. And it gives business people the opportunity to see the 1.4 billion people market on our continent and a GDP of the entire continent adding up to $3.4 trillion. Now, with this agreement, we're then able to get the private sector working with the public sector to embark on meaningful projects such as infrastructure, because for trade to have meaning and to happen on our continent, infrastructure projects must be embarked upon, roads must be built, our airlines must work properly, our ports must work properly, our rail network must work properly. And this is where the private sector can then come and partner with the public sector, where we can work together. And the public sector is keen, having established or inaugurated the African Continental Free Trade Area, in integrating the continent. I saw the integration of the continent during COVID-19, when together as a continent we integrated ourselves when it came to personal protective equipment, and we set up a supplies organization or platform where we bought things together as a continent. And then we came to vaccines, when the West just kept on supplying vaccines to us, and President Kagame, President Macky Sall, myself, and many others then said, we want to make our own vaccines. And then we started a process of integration of things like vaccines into Africa. So we started seeing integration. And what has that led to? A number of businesses being established. So what I'm saying is, we would like the private sector to follow in tandem with the public sector to embrace the AfCFTA and also be active participants. Now, what the public sector will do is to de-risk, particularly when it comes to infrastructure projects, to de-risk a number of these projects through, obviously, the sovereign financial systems that we have in each country, and allow the private sector to participate. So we are twins, we are pods, and we need to work together. And I'd like to see that 17% skepticism whittling down.
Right.
This is a platform that the private sector must be active in. And the other benefit they will get is that it leads to institutional capacity improvement. It bolsters our skills base, the talent that the continent should have. It opens up trading regions beyond just the regions, but to the whole continent. And this is precisely what we are going to be advocating also at the G20. When it comes to things like critical minerals, we want a critical minerals accord that will enable all of us to manage our critical minerals properly. And we can only do so when the public sector and the private sector move together and work together. So your money should be put to good use. We must not just smell it. You must come and put it to real good use. Thank you.
Thank you. President Ramaphosa, these people are sold. You're preaching to the choir in some ways. We all believe in the dream of the AfCFTA. But the borders are closed. The flights are expensive. We can't get visas to South Africa.
Now, don't be too personal. But the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to be the pathfinder, the road opener for all that. It's going to enable all that. The movement of goods, the movement of people, the issue of visas is currently being addressed. And the pace might be slow, but it is happening, and it is going to happen. It's going to open the floodgate for economic activity on our continent. And I would say, watch this space. It is going to happen.
Thank you, sir. President Kagame, another issue, there are several candidates here for President of the African Development Bank. And this is happening when we just learned recently that President Donald Trump intends to cut about $555 million to the concessional window. So they're going to take over an organization that still needs a lot of funding. But can we do it, and is it the right body to develop our continent even when the EU, the US, and others are reducing how much they contribute to it? And this, I guess, is related to your earlier point, we can't rely on others.
Well, again, let me start from where my brother, President Ramaphosa, left off. One, we can
was quite a start with la technique. Vous pouvez venir pour enlever tout ça ou c'est pas elle de. Attends. That was quite. Dans combien de temps, Sophia? Là, ok. That was. Pardon?
Because, for example, let me go straight to the question. The cutting of budgets, cutting of aid, cutting of all kinds of things. And all of a sudden, we Africans, we wake up to this reality when it has been there so many times before, and we start scrambling. What do? No, what we need to do is what we should have done many years ago, and still we can do it. There is a mentality out there, it's sort of a mindset in our continent that somebody out there is going to foot the bill of our development. And that has undermined our effort to contribute as much as we can ourselves for our own development. So what we need to do, I mean, we need to do what we started doing. The frustration here for me is, we talked about how I championed the reform and worked with many other leaders on different subjects. But there is a sense of frustration that what we have agreed, even at a continental level, involving all leaders and how regional communities should work, with the AU at a continental level, is not implemented. The systems are so bureaucratic that you imagine they live in another world, not this one that is so harsh to us that we need to be doing certain things certain ways without expecting that somebody will always be kind to us, and that's what we depend on almost forever. I'm saying this out of experience. I have lived in my country, and I see many other African countries go through that. So on one hand, there is everything in our hands to do whatever we need to do and benefit from that. On the other, we are expecting that somebody else will come and do what we need for ourselves.
Right.
So how can this go on forever? We have the knowledge, we have the vision, we have everything. We have resources, and we have organizations, we organize, we have. Africa should be far ahead of where we are now. And we shouldn't take any comfort that some progress has been made here or there. We just need to do what we have to do.
Right.
Yes, and we have all the means to do it. So, so we are actually our own problems. So if we addressed ourselves to this matter, that we need to work together, that we need to, we export raw materials, all right?
Right.
And then import
the finished product.
Finished products. We export talent and then get experts coming to give us all kinds of things.
No. We're here, we're talking normally as human beings to one another because we know we have to negotiate. Now, Ramaphosa has a long history of negotiation. He was the one who hammered out the deal in 1993, 94 for apartheid, to end apartheid in South Africa. So if anyone understands the long roads and the sort of the marathon-like effort you have to put into negotiating, it's him. So I think that's an encouraging tone.
We also, during this breakdown vision, see the President Ouattara taking the word for the opening ceremony. The Africa CEO Forum is in Abidjan, back to Abidjan. It was quite, appreciated coming back after this year. And what is the position also with Côte d'Ivoire as a country in this moment, to work with the private sector? Did you catch a couple of words important from the President Ouattara?
I think there is a huge emphasis on skills. I think Côte d'Ivoire in the last 5-10 years has really been transformed. You can see it just driving it around. We were here.
Bonjour Dr Sall, ça me fait énormément plaisir d'être